Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams with us on this Tuesday afternoon. Make sure and subscribe on YouTube at Dogs 24/7. A lot to get into today. Some news last week from a couple of arrests involving Georgia players. We're also going to talk about spring practice, Georgia basketball. Jared Curtis, a big-time quarterback target for the Bulldogs, sets his commitment date. Georgia baseball. All kinds of good stuff on this episode. We hope you'll stick around. And again, if you're watching this on YouTube, I will plug this during the show. We have a 50% off sale over at Dogs 24/7. Jump on that. There's only a couple days left on that. And with that, we're going to start the show. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams with me on this Tuesday afternoon. Shout out to Ben Wolk. He is on a much-deserved vacation as we go through the spring and get a chance to catch. He's going to get a chance to catch his breath as we go through. We are nearly halfway through spring practice, so there's a lot of spring intel to get into with the Georgia Bulldogs. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Georgia basketball, the end of their season. Didn't go quite the way the Bulldogs wanted it to go in the NCAA tournament. We're going to talk about what we've learned since then, losing an assistant coach, portal talk, and then we're going to end things with Georgia baseball. But we're going to start this episode with some news. Actually happened while I was in Wichita last week for the NCAA tournament. A couple of Georgia players were arrested in separate driving-related incidents. Nitro Tuggle, wide receiver, was arrested on Thursday morning on charges of speeding and reckless driving. Offensive lineman Marquise Easley was arrested on Friday on charges of reckless conduct and reckless driving, stemming from an incident that happened in Watkinsville on Monday night. We've got the details from Easley's incident over on Dogs 24/7 if you want to read that. The thing to note, there was conversation. He had been asked how fast he was going. He gave a number, I think 25, 30 miles an hour. That did not corroborate with what the police saw at the scene, and the report included that, quote, the tire marks from the incident were consistent with a vehicle laying drag. So both of those players have been suspended. That suspension was announced Thursday afternoon. Both players, Nitro Tuggle and Marquise Easley, indefinitely suspended. So, Kipp, we run into another situation where we're talking about driving and Georgia Bulldogs football players. It's a situation that has come up again and again in recent years. And obviously, there was the tragedy a few years ago with Devin Willock and Chandler LaCroix. So this is always going to be under a microscope. And I thought it was really interesting that they announced the suspensions as quickly as they did. Tuesday night, a little bit after we're recording this for the first time, we get to talk to Kirby Smart about this situation. I know he's going to be asked about it. But again, it's a situation that continues to come up. And as I just mentioned, it's going to be something that Kirby Smart is going to have to answer to on Tuesday night.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if one or both players are no longer with the program when all is said and done, because he's got to continue to make a point about this and send a message to his team that, yeah, these are young players getting fast cars, for the first time in their lives at a young age. But first of all, just thankful that no one's hurt. And, overall, I think this situation is one where you have to send a message to your team, and you need to make sure that regardless of, what the other players in the team think of this, that they of their teammates, that they know you can't do something like this and get away with it. So I think overall, this is going to be very interesting what Kirby Smart does whenever, you guys talk to him later this week. I do think that with this many situations, which now, you have numbers out there saying that there's been over 20, 23, 24 arrests the last couple of years. This is a situation where Kirby Smart's not going to be able to really hide behind it. It's not a culture thing, but it is an issue with NIL, with the guys being able to get, expensive, fast cars and being able to drive fast. There isn't really anything you can do except hold your players accountable and educate them the best way that you can. So I think that everyone is going to point to Georgia as having a culture issue, but we see this also happening in the NFL. And you see young players, getting the access to cars and things they didn't have before. And that happens. You see arrests all the time. So I just think that, Nitro Tugwell is a player who just got his license recently. So that's a situation where he's a young driver out there and coming out there and making a big mistake. And then with Marquez Easley, I mean, that is a tough situation that time of night to be out there and what it looked to be, just out there trying to show off with his car and losing control in a residential area. And so I think for him, he's just lucky no one got hurt, and we're going to have to wait and see what happens this week with both of those players. But it's unfortunate that it continues to happen. We know that Kirby Smart is not sitting back and just letting this happen. He is continuing to try to send a message to his players, and that's all you can do. There's still, young adults who get to make their own decisions. And unfortunately, it seems, in the public eye of Georgia's program that there are more situations of this happening than we see elsewhere, but there's no real way to know. You can't compare it to other programs because you just don't know what is actually happening across the country. But overall, like I said to begin with, just glad nobody got hurt.
Yeah, I mean, it's a situation that, again, it keeps happening over and over, and that's why the conversation's worth having. And I am really fascinated to hear what Kirby says. I mean, he can't hide from something like this. And it's a situation where, when it comes to how serious the situation is, I'm not naive. I mean, I make the point all the time. If I'm like a 17, 18-year-old kid with the access to fast cars like these football players have, and it's not just at Georgia. I know that it's everywhere. I mean, I'd make really bad decisions, but it's got to be a point that gets pushed across that, like, look, if you want to play at Georgia, you can't do stuff like this. We are under a microscope, and there's a history at this point with this program, and people pay attention to what you do. You just can't make mistakes like this. And again, I was really interested and a little surprised they suspended Marquise Easley and Nitro Tugwell as quickly as they did. And it'll be fascinating to see what happens with them from here. Yeah, and stay glued to dogs247.com. We will have the latest, both from what Kirby Smart says on Tuesday night, but also any further developments with Nitro Tugwell and Marquise Easley. I do not believe that the incident report from Nitro Tugwell's arrest has been made public. So I'm hoping we're able to get a hold of that before too long. All right, Kipp, let's talk about spring practice. Georgia at this point has gone through 6 practices, closing in on the halfway point of 15 practices as they get ready for G-Day on Saturday, April 12th. Just sharing some of the intel that's been on over at Dogs247. Not going to give you guys everything, because that's why you need to subscribe and join us on the Junkyard. But wrote today about the offensive line. I think things are trending in the right direction with that group. The biggest question I have had has been Ernest Green and what they sort of see as his role going forward. And, I think that they've taken the right approach where I expect Ernest Green to be playing right tackle when we get to G-Day on April 12th. I think that, he's a guy talented enough to play left tackle, but, he had a down 2024. Maybe injuries had something to do with that, but I think they see opportunity to get someone else at left tackle. I would expect Monroe Freeling to be that guy once we get to fall camp, but he's not going to be playing it in the spring because of his shoulder surgery. So fascinating to see what Ernest Green does going forward and what how he fits in there, because I do think he's a capable tackle. Took a step back last year, although again, I think some of that might have been due to injury. Some of the other things that have stood out to me that I'm willing to share for free on the podcast and on YouTube, hearing a lot of good things about Jaden Riddell. I think that he's a tight end that it was very easy to sort of forget about because of bringing in Elias Williams and Ethan Barbour, because you bring back Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky. From what I've been told, Jaden Riddell has taken real steps forward, and I think that's huge. Really more so for him more than anybody, because when you look at the depth Georgia has at tight end right now, it's really easy to get lost in the shuffle and to not be able to keep up. But it sounds like Jaden Riddell's done a very good job of keeping pace and staying relevant in a room where it's very easy to lose and not be able to keep up because of the talent in that room. A couple other guys I'll shout out. Bo Walker, sounds like he's had a very, very strong spring for the Bulldogs, and Georgia needs it. I reached out to some folks about some of the running backs that are banged up. It sounds like they're taking it slow with Roderick Robinson, which makes sense. I think that they're not going to push the issue in the spring. Didn't get quite as much clarification on Branson, but I think it's very much the same. They don't want to push the issue with those guys coming off of injury, so they need somebody to step up behind Nate Frazier. I think at this point it might be Bo Walker, a true freshman. I think that he's very much lived up to the hype and has been a guy that has made the most of the opportunity. So Bo deserves a lot of credit. I think he's done a good job in the short amount of time he's been at Georgia. A couple other guys that I'd shout out are at receiver. Zachariah Branch, I think he's a guy we've talked about a ton, and it sounds like he's continued to make plays. I feel really confident, Kipp, in him being part of my breakout team. I don't know if the rest of the team's really holding up quite as well as my first pick, but he's someone in the offseason I projected to be Georgia's leading receiver in terms of yards. I like the way he's playing. I like the way things are trending. I think he's got an opportunity there to live up to that really high bar and be able to match it. And then the other guy shout out is Colby Young. I think that, even going back to the winter when he was practicing for the Sugar Bowl, although it didn't look like he was going to be able to play, and he ultimately did not, he was making plays during Sugar Bowl prep. And I think he's continued that this spring. I think he's a guy that is going to be your start next receiver, although I think Noah Thomas is going to play quite a bit too. But Colby's just a big body, and he's a guy that's able to go up and make plays. And based on what I've heard at this point, he's really risen to the occasion. And I think he set himself up well, which is great news for Gunnar Stockton. I mean, you have a guy that big you can count on. We saw glimpses with Carson Beck and Colby Young kind of being that go-to guy in the red zone. And then, Colby has the arrest and isn't really a factor anymore because of it. I think he's got a big opportunity in 2025. And I think he and Gunnar are going to make quite a few plays once we get to the fall. But Kipp, has anything caught your attention from the spring at this point? Anything you want to talk about as we get, I guess we're 9 practices, which includes G-Day, away from the spring being over?
Yeah, I'm interested to see what we actually see on G-Day and how that works with so much change in all the spring games. But the most fascinating thing for me is the Bo Walker buzz that we're hearing just kind of feels like Nate Frazier last year. And I just think that's just kind of not mind-blowing, but like it is a little surprising because Nate Frazier came in with a little bit more fanfare. He had just been coming off that really impressive performance of the All-American Bowl and just kind of took that and kept going with it and looked like, Georgia's most physically talented running back in that room, even with Trevor Etienne being there. And now with Bo Walker, he didn't really have that same kind of buzz coming in, but that's behind the scenes. That's all we're hearing right now is that he's just stringing together impressive practice after practice and just seems, just as good as what Frazier looked like when he got into town. So I just think that, a guy that maybe didn't have the highest expectations coming in, but, they need help back there. And we talk about the run game last year and how disappointing it was. Well, having multiple guys out there with that kind of talent would really help and just kind of continue on that. I think, hearing Gunnar Stockton has been really impressive throughout the spring and looks like the clear leader. Connection with that with Drew Bobo. I think that the leadership role that he's taken in that offensive line room and just the responsibility he's taken, knowing that whoever's at quarterback, I mean, he is going to be liable for their success and the offensive line. I think I've heard that he's putting in the extra work. He's a guy that's just incredibly intelligent. Not going to, be the number one most athletic offensive lineman at the combine in a couple of years, but a guy that is hard nosed, tough, and just willing to put in the extra work. And he can move people as well. Going up against Georgia's defensive line in practice, I've heard really good things about Drew Bobo, another guy that I guess kind of like Bo Walker, kind of counted out. Not a guy that anyone really expected to be a important part of this program, this offense, and now is one of the most important parts of this offense going into the summer. Just so hearing good things about him as well, and I think all the new safeties we've heard of, Georgia got in the transfer portal to kind of get some competition there. The one guy I'm hearing the most is Ja'Cory Thomas. I've heard he's had an outstanding spring as well, and is a guy that should not be counted out. He's been in the system. He's looked good at times, and I think that he is a guy that has a strong chance to start at one of the safety positions. Probably, I would, maybe next to the KJ Bolden when all is said and done. So I've heard good things about him. And one other guy, I think this is the time of spring where they're moving guys around, trying to get different looks, especially in offense. And I've heard great things about Dylan Bell, moving not just at flanker, but at slot. I think all the talk this offseason about him getting some snaps again at running back, I think those are true as well. I think that's going to be a big part of him. Maybe not, a huge chunk of the offense, but I do think there's going to be just times, especially in the red zone, where they just put him at running back and say, hey, make guys miss in space. I think that's going to be just a new wrinkle. And along those lines, Ethan Barbour, I just don't think they're going to be able to keep him off the field as an H-back option for Georgia this year. So how stacked is that tight end room right now? I mean, Lawson Loki, good luck holding off Jaden Riddell, and then all of them. I mean, Ethan Barbour and Elias Williams, those are guys are coming in hungry and trying to fight for snaps. So once again, I think that tight end room is the most stacked in the country.
It's unreal. And it seems like, going back to 2 years ago when you lose Brock Bowers, you're just like, or really last offseason, it's like, wow, what are you going to do? And, they don't have that Brock Bowers, but I think they're just fine with what they got. Todd Hartley continues to recruit really well. You mentioned the safeties. I think that, Ja'Cory Thomas, a guy that's bided his time. And, when you do this job, you don't necessarily root for people. You want to see how guys do. But if he were to win a job, I think that is a guy that's easy to root for because he stayed at Georgia. He's been a guy, I'll be honest, that, I thought the last couple of off season, you just kind of pay attention to, okay, could this guy transfer? He's not really played a ton. He stayed at Georgia. I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And, maybe he comes out of the spring as a starting safety. And really just the only other guy I want to shout out, which is not really going out on a limb. And thank God Ben Wolk is not here to hear this, but I just have heard a ton of great things about Chris Cole, which was Ben's number one pick in our spring breakouts draft. But I think the guy is a stud. I think that he's a guy that sort of like Jalen Walker. I don't know that he's going to play the same role as Jalen. I may ask Kirby if there's any shared traits he sees between them, but he like Jalen is going to demand, by his play that he gets on the field. Like you just have no choice but to get Chris Cole on the field. So from what I've heard, Kipp, I'm really worried as we get close to, I guess about a month from now, we'll do the vote of how the teams did because we can talk about it now because Ben's not here. But that Chris Cole pick, it might be hard to beat.
Yeah, it's real hard to nail it when you have the number one overall pick. I mean, gosh. Let's go. I mean, the Spurs had it real tough last year as well, making that decision. But yeah, I look forward to Kirby Smart telling you that they do some of the same things, but they're completely different players. Because that's just how Kirby's going to be prepared to answer. He's going to have that one queued up as soon as you start asking if there's any similarities there. But yeah, Chris Cole, the skill set is unbelievable. And that's what you need. You need dynamic players on defense because Georgia needs to bounce back on both sides of the ball, really. They kind of underperformed on defense when you look at towards the NFL draft and the fact they're probably going to have 3 first-round picks. I think you got to get back to having guys that can create havoc plays at, at all three levels. And I think Chris Cole is the guy that can just do a lot for you. I look forward to seeing just how they utilize him, because I think that he has a chance to be one of the best linebackers in coverage that, Georgia's really had, just from what he brings to that table athletically. It's rare to have guys like that can play all three downs, that can cover not just running backs and tight ends. If you need him in the slot, he's not going to hurt you there. We kind of saw that last year when Georgia would have some guys out there in slot and teams would just run slants all day and make Georgia pay for that. So I think he's a guy that might not hurt you as much there and will allow you to have different looks on the field.
Before we go to a break, I want to make sure to, again, we're roughly halfway through spring. I wanted to talk about what we still want to find out. And this sort of goes into something I am going to ask Kirby on Tuesday. It's outside linebacker. I want to hear how Quintavious Johnson is doing, because I heard good things at the start of spring, but to me, I mean, like, Quintavious Johnson might be the most interesting person on this defense. If he is holding up well, if he is showing he's up for starting, we may see Georgia be really quiet when that spring portal opens. They may not go after an experienced edge rusher. They may say, we feel confident in Quintavious Johnson. And then you've got those three freshmen behind him. So to me, that edge position, Quintavious Johnson specifically, that's something I want to pay attention to, see what I can find out over these next couple weeks. Is there a competition or a position, Kipp, that you're really interested in with what's left of spring?
I like that pick because I do think edge rusher is the biggest question mark. I'm curious if Georgia was playing Marshall tomorrow, who would be the starting three defensive linemen? I think on paper, you probably would say, well, it's, Christian Miller, pencil him in, as long as he's healthy, Xavier McLeod, and probably Jordan Hall, which is a different look. That puts you out there with some bigger guys, but not really that kind of, Tyrion Ingham, Dawkins, Michael Williams, Trevon Walker, not that true, like, just defensive end. So that's kind of, I don't know if we're going to get an answer to that, but I want to know, who do they have out there that can kind of play that role for Georgia? Who is going to be that, that defensive end that can kind of create a little bit of havoc in the backfield, but also just not be a liability against the run. And just thinking about last year with the fact that, they were asking Chaz Chambliss to do a lot there. They had different guys playing that position. And, the results were a little mixed there as far as just the run stuffs and being able to create consistent pressure, but without, giving up some of those run fits and setting the edge. So, yeah, I think that defensive front is going to look very different. So that kind of just goes back into what you're saying. Who's going to be there at edge, but also what's the defensive front going to look like in general?
Yeah, I like your projected lineup there. I do wonder if a guy like Joseph Jonah-Ajonye will try to get in the mix, like how that looks. But if I had to make a guess, it's the names that you threw out there on the line. But it's going to be something to watch. And I don't know if we're going to get another viewing period between now and G-Day. If I were a betting man, that will not be the case, which makes G-Day all the more interesting. And why you guys should follow along at Dogs 24/7, since that bad boy is not going to be on TV. We're going to get ready to take a break. Before we do that, I want to plug our latest sale, 50% off over at dogs247.com. Got to say, this is a great time to join. And also, if you can just look at the website on Tuesday, a lot of good VIP content. Looking at the offensive line, as I talked about earlier. A couple of days ago, I wrote about just some of the intel that I've heard to this point in the spring. I thought that was worthwhile if you're a Georgia basketball fan. Got a coaching hot board up with Eric Pastrana going on to Miami, which we're going to talk about later in this episode. You've got that. You've got the recruiting season, as we're going to talk about Jared Curtis in a little bit. Ben does such a good job of covering Georgia recruiting for us. Georgia basketball, Georgia baseball, all kinds of good stuff. I highly recommend you guys go sign up at dogs247.com, 50% off of VIP membership. And I think there's a little bit under 48 hours left on that sale. So get on it because you do not want to miss out. So we're going to take a quick break and come back, talk about Jared Curtis, talk about Georgia basketball, talk about Georgia football making a couple of support staff hires, and then bring back on Olivia Sayer to talk about Georgia baseball. All right, Kipp, let me set the scene for Sunday night. Jared Curtis, a four-star quarterback, a one-time Georgia commit, teases there's going to be a little bit of news coming on Monday. Teased it for like midnight Central, so I was like, let's just hang around, see if anything comes out at 1 a.m. Eastern time. No luck there, which I kind of decided that was probably what was going to happen. But he announces on Monday that he is setting a commitment date. He will be picking between Georgia and Oregon on May 5th. We already knew that the Bulldogs and the Ducks were finalists in this recruitment, but we got a little bit over a month before the four-star quarterback. I believe we have him as the number 4 quarterback in the 2026 cycle, decides where he's going. So what's your reaction to this news, him setting the May 5th commitment date? And what do you think about where things stand with Georgia going after this very talented quarterback?
I mean, I just laughed because of a countdown on Instagram going off and nothing happening. You got the confetti, but that's it. Yeah, that's recruiting. But yeah, here we are. We know the date. I think you can look at it a number of ways, but the fact that he's ready to announce a decision coming off a Georgia visit, probably, pretty good sign. I think Georgia has to just like where they stand. Everyone kind of thinks this is just a, Georgia NIL versus Nike battle here. I would say that it's a little bit more than that. There's a little bit more that goes into the decision, but I don't expect either team is going to be trying to show up with a coupon code in his recruitment. So I don't think that's really something that is going to be the deciding factor, even though everyone's going to just say whoever makes the last offer for a 5-star quarterback probably going to get it. I think there's more to it with this, and it's obviously they're putting a lot of effort into this, him, Curtis, and his family, and I think him taking multiple day visits to both programs, spending multiple days in Athens. He watched them practice. And he's going to do it again. I don't know the date for another Oregon visit, but I just don't see him not taking another trip with this much time between, now and his decision. But he's expected to be back at Georgia for the G-Day game on April 12th. So they have another chance to see him. And I think that, honestly, this feels like forever, 6 weeks. I think there's just going to be too many more battles behind the scenes of them trying to convince him that they're the best situation for him. I know that when Van Gorder left, I think Montgomery, whenever Gummy left, that kind of hurt Georgia a little bit because there was a connection there. But the Curtis family loves Mike Bobo. I like where Georgia's positioned right now. I think that they have the edge with Jared Curtis right now, and they've made him a priority for a long time. But they're also still recruiting other quarterbacks. Landon Duckworth out of Jackson, Alabama, is a guy that recently named Ole Miss his leader, I believe, but still has 4 official visits to take. And so the timing actually works out pretty well. Georgia's going to recruit Jared Curtis really hard, but they would take the commitment of Landon Duckworth, no questions asked. Bo Bentley, he's a guy that's just as physically talented as Jared Curtis out of Texas. And then that's another guy they're going to continue to recruit. So I don't think Georgia has put all their eggs into the Jared Curtis basket. I think that just like last year with Ryan Montgomery, they are making sure that they have an elite quarterback on board for this cycle. And this is just the first one that's going to make his decision. But I do think right now Georgia has the edge, in my opinion. But he really likes Dan Lanning, so I just don't think that one's over just yet.
Yeah, I totally agree. If I were predicting right now, I would pick Georgia, which I put over on the Junkyard. But I'll be honest, Kip, if he was making this decision right now, I would feel a lot better. But we have a little over a month, so a lot of things can change. You know what I mean? The door is open. As you mentioned, we expect him at G Day, and I imagine he'll get out to Eugene at least one more time before that decision is made on May 5th. So it's one of those things I'm always fascinated with how you have to recruit quarterbacks because Georgia could very well lose this recruitment. And you can't just start from square one with somebody else. You also have to have those relationships. And I really do think that Jared Curtis is the priority at this position. He is the guy when push came to shove. If they said, we want one quarterback, I think it would be Jared Curtis. But you have to be ready. And they did the exact same thing last year. I think Matt Zollers was the high priority guy, and he picks Missouri, and they wound up getting Ryan Montgomery instead. So fascinating thing. And, to keep, plugging our site. I mean, it's why it's fun to follow along on dogs247.com. Like we're going to have, like you said, like 6 weeks to keep tabs on this and not only on our side, but you get to see what they're saying over on the Oregon side. I'm sure this recruitment is going to take some twists and turns, and I hope everybody watching and listening is along for the ride with us. All right, some more football news. I did not plug this at the top of the show, but I do think it's worth mentioning. Our Matt Zenitz at CBS Sports reporting that Georgia is targeting John Lilly and Phil Rauscher for support staff roles. Phil Rauscher coming over from the Jacksonville Jaguars. John Lilly might be a name that some of y'all remember. He was Georgia's tight ends coach from 2008 to 2015. I don't know about you, Kip, but I'm pumped about the idea of seeing John Lilly around. He was the tight ends coach when I was in school. Back then, they used to do position interviews. You get a position coach once a week or once every 2 weeks. And so talked to John a good bit, and he was always nice, very friendly. I love both of these additions just because you get guys with a lot of experience. Phil Rauscher coming from the NFL. John Lilly, a guy that's been at Georgia before, and he's also coached in the NFL. He was with the Rams, and he also coached with the Browns when Todd Monken was offensive coordinator. So these seem like slam dunk hires for me when it comes to the support staff. I think there's a lot of like with both of these hires.
Yeah, John Lilly, one of the smartest coaches that have ever set foot in the Butts-Mehre building, one of Rick's best recruiters, and a guy who would often mix him and Bobo up. So I think, if Georgia's offense looks better this year, he's probably coming on at the perfect time because he'll probably get some credit for that. And he'll have people, coming up to him, and whether or not they think, they're talking to Bobo, he's not going to correct them when they want to give him compliments for what Georgia is doing this year. So if it's true, I do think that, he's probably already on board, and this, maybe Kirby Smart's willing to, confirm that this week. We'll find out. But yeah, it's a no-brainer. That's a guy you add to your staff anytime you can. And also the chance to add someone who's been coaching an offensive line in the NFL for the last 4 years. Those are, easy decisions for me, I think, as long as they're going to fit the culture of your coaching staff. You can't have too many eyes there. And so I know fans are just probably on one side saying, okay, Kirby's getting the band back together for real. Probably looking at the old coaching staffs to see who else he can bring back. But at the same time saying, okay, the offense needs all the help it can get. And I don't really disagree with that. As many eyes you can get in that room to try to put yourself in a better position to improve, go for it, because you need to, especially just as far as the run blocking going. You got to get that improved. You got a lot of new faces in there. So, having another coach on board who could help out, I think is huge. And a lot of the criticism gets put on the field coaches, but for a long time now, the support staff have played a huge role in the development of the players, not just at Georgia, but across the country. These guys are important too. So adding these guys isn't, a knock on the field staff, but it's just a point that if you can have unlimited staff members, go for it.
Yeah, with John Lilly, I want to make the point too that Todd Hartley would have been around as a GA when when John Lilly was the tight ends coach. So John Lilly and Todd Hartley back together. I think I have to imagine Todd Hartley's pumped about that. I'm looking forward to when we're in fall camp. We'll get Todd and I'll be sure to ask him about John Lilly. Before we change the subject, I did want to bring this up, Kipp. You talked about getting the band back together. Kirby's hired a lot of people that have coached at Georgia over the years. What would be the one addition that would make you go, okay, all right, we've maybe gone a little too far here. I'll give you mine. If we see Tony Ball back at Georgia, man, we really are throwing it back to what, 2007, 2008.
I don't know if I would go that far. I would say, if you're bringing in Todd Grantham, it would kind of open some eyes, but at the same time, like, they need some help as far as the edge rusher position, but just don't let him in the room on third down would be my situation. He could be the first and second down coach, but just keep him out of the building when it comes to third down. That one would open my eyes a little bit.
Todd Grantham now at Oklahoma State, so best of luck to the Cowboys. He's a defensive coordinator there. All right, Kipp, Georgia men's basketball minute, and we're going to talk for a few minutes on this one. Georgia's end of season, not what the Bulldogs had in mind. They lose to Gonzaga 89-68 in the first round of the NCAA tournament. And quite frankly, this game was pretty much over before it began. Gonzaga scores 27 of the first 30 points in this game. Georgia showed more life in the second half, but just they were outclassed from the beginning. And again, I wrote about this on Friday after the fact. I mean, there's really no shame in this. This is a Gonzaga team that, they wound up pushing Houston to the edge. I think if Gonzaga had not fallen behind like they had, they could have won that game, and they nearly almost did anyway. This is a Gonzaga program that has developed and established itself as a perennial championship contender. And, the thing I wrote on Friday was I thought it was kind of fitting. These were both Bulldogs programs because on one side you had Georgia, hadn't been to the NCAA tournament in a decade. And then on the other, you have another Bulldogs program in Gonzaga where they're expected to contend for the championship every single year. I think the fact they didn't make the Sweet 16 this year, like, I can't remember how long of a streak that broke, but it was a significant streak of Gonzaga getting out of that first weekend. So I know people were disappointed. They could have played better. I think Mike White would have told you that. The players would have told you that. But this was a Gonzaga team. I just didn't see a world where Georgia won, came out of that game with a win. Could have played better, but I think that was a pretty predictable way for the season to end.
It is, and at the same time, it just kind of shows how far Georgia still needs to go. They made huge strides, but Georgia's most successful, like their best team in a decade against maybe the Zags. Like, this is one of their least heralded teams. One of their least successful teams. That is why that a lot of people talked about Georgia maybe having a chance. That's why it was an 8-9 seed game. And Georgia kind of got exposed a little bit for just not being ready for that moment. So even though going into the season, no one expected Georgia to be where they were. And they were picked at the end of the bottom half of the conference. And I don't think anyone knew just how strong this conference was going to be going into the season. And that helped Georgia as far as just, toughening overall, like pushing them to improve their game. But there's now you see that you just can't relax now. You see programs rebuild. I mean, I think at this point you have to expect that almost every program is just going to completely turn over their roster every year. And seeing the other programs, make the huge leaps they're able to, Georgia has to do that too. So while they're going to have to attack the portal, you also have to make Silas Demery the face of your program right now. You got to pitch him on not leaving. I mean, I don't. If they can get somebody better than him to come through the portal, sure, but that is your best chance of being relevant and competitive next year is a guy that looked like an all SEC player toward the last half of the season. Keeping a guy like that in your program, you lose him, it's kind of you are really fighting it because you already know you're losing. Guys like Dakota LaFew and Tyron Lawrence. You're going to lose some other players to the portal. You know that Asa Newell's played his last game. So trying to get to selling people on getting to a Sweet 16 or past that, keeping Silas Demery is number one. And then somehow you got to improve the roster. And good luck. I think it's a huge challenge because while I love Silas Demery, I still think like you have to figure out how you're going to get true point guard play. If he's going to take that step, sure. But I just think that the turnovers early in that game in the NCAA tournament had Georgia just out of it before they went to their first commercial break. And so that's something that if you have to just have better point guard play in the end.
Yeah, I totally agree on the Silas Demery Jr. point. Like they have, if they lose him, I think you're looking at a significant step back, which is not what Mike White and anyone around the program want. Asa Newell hasn't announced yet what he's doing, but I think you're right, Kipp. I feel pretty confident he's going to go pro and have a chance to be a first-round pick, maybe work his way into the lottery. It's a tough situation that Mike White finds himself in getting ready for year 4. And we'll talk about why here now. Eric Pastrana, his top assistant, by far his best recruiter, has left for Miami. That was something that had kind of been talked about in the last few weeks, joining Jai Lucas there at Miami. Makes sense for Eric. He's a Miami native. I think he sees an opportunity there, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But Mike has got to knock it out of the park with this hire. And for me, Kipp, the most concerning thing is, how are you juggling all this right now with the portal open? There was, I want to say, like 600 guys went in the portal on Monday. You have got to figure out what you're doing with your staff. And again, you want to get a phenomenal recruiter because that's what you have to replace. Eric Pastrana is a guy that had a relationship with Asa Newell, along with Mike White, for several years, going back to when they were at Florida. You've got to fill that role and try to keep your roster together. As we record this on Tuesday afternoon, there's not been any Georgia players go in the portal. But, man, Mike White is he's got a few balls up in the air that he's having to juggle right now, and I honestly do not envy him because he has got some big shoes to fill with Eric Pastrana moving on.
Yeah, it's a huge offseason for him, and you're right. He has to find an elite recruiter and maybe someone with connections to some, an impact player. But at the same time, you can't just get someone simply for that reason, unless this guy, just knows everyone at the prep academy and like can bring in the starting 5. But you do need, that is, you need to find someone who can bring in some elite talent. Make sure you keep Silas, but also, Blue Kane, Samto Sorrell, RJ Godfrey, those are guys that could go in the portal and have plenty of options. So you need to just make sure you can keep, those 4 guys are your core of your program right now. So you got to keep those guys, find an elite hire, and have the rest of your coaching staff attacking the portal at the same time. So this is the not make or break for Mike White, because he obviously got himself some equity by doing what he needed to do this season. But you cannot afford to take a step back this year. This is it. You have to be able to bring that type of product back to Georgia, because there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to. We just named all the challenges for him, but every basketball program is going through similar challenges and turnover. And you look at Kentucky teams and teams out there that have to replace basically everyone. They can do it. Georgia should be able to do it. So good luck, Mike White. No pressure at all, but also, Georgia should be getting back to the tournament next year. That should be the expectation now that they are in the tournament at least 2 out of every 3 years.
And to one point that I would add before we move on, this isn't exactly what Georgia wanted, but they could be trying to figure all this out while they have games still going on, especially with the transfer portal. Like there are guys, I know I saw, I think it's Justin Pippen from Michigan. It's going in the portal. Michigan's still playing. Michigan's getting ready for the Sweet 16. So Georgia at least is not game planning and prepping while they're doing all this. So that's at least one consolation given the timing of the portal. All right, we're going to switch over to baseball, bring back on Olivia Sayer. Georgia baseball, my goodness, 24-2 now, swept Florida, had a fantastic series, and I wanted to point this out before I pull up Olivia's clip. I sold Georgia baseball short. I was like, yeah, they scored 30 runs in this series, which you'll hear. They scored 40 runs, Kipp. I mean, my goodness gracious. They just absolutely took it to what I really think is a very good Florida team. So we'll bring on Olivia now and talk about what was a fantastic weekend for the Bulldogs. All right, we want to welcome on Olivia Sayer again. Welcome her back to the show to talk about Georgia baseball. And my goodness, Georgia baseball on a roll now, 24-2 on the season, coming off a 3-game sweep of Florida. And folks, it was not close. So, Olivia, before we really get into this, just a really basic first question. Did you see that, what played out in Gainesville? Did you see that coming from Georgia?
Yeah, I thought Georgia had a better shot than a lot of people did entering the series. I know a bunch of outlets picked Florida to take it. Some even picked Florida to sweep. That being said, like I mentioned, I thought Georgia was going to do well in Gainesville. Did I see them completely demolishing the Gators like they did? No, I did not. Did I see them hitting as many home runs as runs that Florida scored? No, I did not. But definitely a good weekend for the Bulldogs.
So let's start with the offense. They scored 30 runs over these 3 games. What was working? What stood out to you with how productive they were at the plate?
I think just the depth of this lineup, and it's something that we saw a lot during non-conference play. And the question was, how's it going to fare once SEC play starts? I think that question has been answered so far through 2 series. I believe against Florida, the bottom 3 of Georgia's lineup hit .429 with 10 extra base hits. So it's not just one guy that's producing. It's all up and down. What Christian Adams did this weekend, going back to his home state, I believe he had 3 home runs, hit 8 for 14 at the plate. That was really impressive. But this lineup, it's going to be a lot of different guys, and they're going to get it done in a variety of different ways.
So who were some of the other hitters that stood out to you during this Florida series?
Yeah, definitely Adams. And then the obvious one, Rylan Dabrowski. He just continues to be on a hot streak. And a cool fact about him, he is currently on pace to finish 2nd on Georgia's list for all-time homers, right above Gordon Beckham and right behind Charlie Condon. So anytime you're on that pace, you're definitely doing something right. Then aside from that, I just think up and down. Devin Obie had a 2-homer game, which was impressive. A lot of these transfers just coming in. Brennan Hudson got, I believe it was his first or second start, was 0 for 5 entering Saturday's series. Hit the first, or it was either the first or second pitch he saw. Sorry, there's so much background noise. I'm at a dining hall. But hit the first or second pitch he saw out of the ballpark. So just up and down this lineup, a lot of guys were getting it done.
Now, going into a series like Florida, and really we've heard this conversation throughout the season, it's not really been the batting that's been the question, it's been the pitching. What did you take from how they pitched against Florida and, where they are really as a staff at this point in the season?
I think there's a lot of improvement. The biggest thing that stood out to me was they didn't look timid on the mound, and part of that could be attributed to you had Brian Curley up there. I don't think that guy gets rattled by anything. Leighton Finley came out throwing strikes. Charlie Goldstein was still a little iffy, but the most positive aspect, I wrote it down. Against Kentucky, Georgia's pitchers issued 32 free passes, and that was 20 walks and 12 hit by pitches. Against Florida, that 32 was down to 14. So that's definitely the biggest thing that gives me optimism for this pitching staff going forward is if it can come out, if it can attack the strike zone, I think it's going to do good things. And if this pitching staff can do good things, then this team is definitely have a lot of potential.
So what were your biggest takeaways just from this series? I mean, this is a very good Florida team that they went and swept. And what do you feel like you learned about this team from that series?
Yeah, I think sort of just like we just talked about, this offense is definitely deep. It has so many guys that can get it done. And also that if this pitching staff can throw strikes, it has potential to be one of the top ones in the league. And that's the biggest thing with it is don't be afraid to pound the strike zone. I know it's something that Wes Johnson has preached to them, especially this week after that Kentucky series. And if they can really do that, then they can do a lot of great things. But something else that stood me from this series, just Wes Johnson did an incredible job. You look Friday for him to challenge Colton Smith like that, and it paid off. You look on Saturday, the lineup switch, he had Henry Hunter, Georgia's catcher, batting leadoff, which was rare, and it paid off super well. Brendan Hudson in the starting lineup. Saturday, he delivered a pregame message to Leighton Finley about how he doesn't care if he uses up all of his gas in the first inning. Just go out there, attack the strike zone. If you run out, so be it. We have so many other guys that we can bring in. So I just think the moves that he did this weekend paid off very well.
Yeah, I saw some people online questioning Wes's decision, and in Wes we trust at this point because of how well they're playing. Olivia, we continue to see Georgia go up the rankings with what they've accomplished. Again, they're 24-2 on the season. Where do you feel like they are right now as far as the SEC? Who are some of those other teams that you think are playing really well in the conference right now?
I would definitely say top 3. I think it's super hard to unseat Tennessee right now just with what they're doing on the mound, what they're doing at the plate. They're second in home runs. Their ERA is up there. I know they had a bit of a rough one against ETSU and then in one game against Alabama, but they came back. They won that series in a tough road environment in Tuscaloosa. So definitely think they're still number 1. Georgia and Texas are the 2 that I'm looking at for that 2 and that 3 spot. I believe Texas has won both of its SEC series, just took the one from LSU this past weekend, which is super impressive because you look at what LSU is doing on the mound. For them to take that series, albeit at home, is definitely important for them. Georgia, I just think what Georgia did at Gainesville was so impressive. You look at the pitching staff that Florida put together, you look at the pitching staff that Kentucky put together, and the way Georgia was just able to rake against it and tee off against it was super impressive, and I think warrants them of either that 2 or that 3 slot. And then behind them, I'm looking at an LSU that did have a rough weekend, but I still think is really good in this league. And Arkansas, whose pitching staff is always elite, but they seem to be hitting a lot better this year. Then behind that, just a shuffling of teams.
All right, midweek against West Georgia before hosting Auburn. What are you looking for out of the games ahead? What are you looking to learn from this week of Georgia baseball?
I want to see if Georgia's pitching can continue what it started against Florida. I think, as I mentioned, they really came out attacking the strike zone, and let's just see if they can continue that against West Georgia, which is definitely not one of those elite top teams, but does have a really good record, is definitely a respectable team during the series. I believe they kept it close with Georgia Tech prior in the year, so they're definitely a team that if Georgia doesn't watch out for it can do some real damage. And so can that pitching staff, I believe the offense is going to continue to roll, but can the pitching staff continue to build upon what it did in Florida?
Olivia, before I let you go, got to shout you out for coming to us on campus. Where are we in Snelling? Are we in Bolton? Where are we right now?
I'm at Joe Frank Harris, and what I thought was the quietest part of Joe Frank Harris, but I was sadly mistaken. But yes, definitely my favorite dining hall on campus. I think their smoothies are really good.
You can't go wrong. Anything else you want to shout out just with your coverage over at Dogs 24/7?
Yeah, nothing I can think about. Just I'll be on Twitter at Olivia Sayer, and then I'll be on the message boards and posting some stories. I have a couple of stories coming out this weekend, hopefully before the West Georgia game tomorrow that I'm excited about. So you can look forward to those.
All right, Olivia continues to crush the Georgia baseball coverage. We appreciate that, and we appreciate her taking some time while she's busy with classes and whatnot to give us the update on the Diamond Dogs because they are playing really well. All right, Kipp, before we get out of here, it is a few days away from the Sweet 16. I wanted to check in with you. How's the bracket looking? Do you feel like did your bracket get messed up by what was, honestly, one of the more chalky first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament?
Just to show how well my bracket went, I had Clemson in the Final Four. So at that point, I just stopped looking and just assumed that it's probably not going well. I think for the most part, the rest of my bracket is mostly there, but I found it fascinating. Like I try to keep up every year with how long there's a perfect bracket, but is it always that we don't even get out of the first weekend? Because that was surprising to me. I saw that the ESPN had 1 out of 23 million, and I was like, oh, I'll check CBS Sports, I'll check Yahoo, and even USA Today. I looked at all of them, and yeah, all none of them made it out of Sunday, so that made me feel a little bit better. But overall, I think, I mean, in the end, like you look at some of these teams, and the way that Florida's playing, that's the most fascinating game for me, because I love Derek Queen. As a Hawks fan, I was kind of bummed to see how well he's played, because I just wanted them to have a chance. If we get the Kings pick at like 13 or 14 for him to be there, he's not going to be there. I don't even know if he makes it to the Bulls at number 8 at this point. He looks outstanding. So I just think that game is just going to be really entertaining. But overall, it's like, who's going to stop Duke? I don't know. They look really strong right now, and these games all look outstanding. So the fact that it's gone out, mostly chalk, just means we're going to have some really outstanding matchups. This coming up later this week. So I'm really looking forward to it. I doubt. I mean, I'd be surprised if any of these games has a double-digit win. I just feel like they're all going to be like 3 to 7 point games, which is the best time right now in sports. I mean, we got opening day, man. We got the Braves are about to make their push in a loaded division. Georgia baseball is hitting somehow more homers than they hit last year with the lineup that they had. So I just think it's just an outstanding time to be a sports fan.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And the weather just slowly but surely is starting to warm up here in Athens. There's been little glimpses of spring being here. I think maybe in the next week or so we'll really be feeling it. But in my bracket, I got 3 of the 4 Final Four still alive. Gonzaga was the only one that wound up getting knocked out. And they gave Houston a heck of a fight. I think they went down swinging, but still got Auburn, still got Texas Tech. I had to zag while everybody else picked Florida, so I went with Texas Tech. We'll say I was really close to picking St. John's to win that side, that region, and that would not have worked out. So I'm glad I did not do that. And then so Gonzaga, which is gone, and then Tennessee is the other team, and Tennessee has played well to this point. But yeah, you mentioned Florida, Maryland. I think that'll be a fun game, and several of them on the slate. Like, one of the bright sides of a very chalky first 2 rounds is you've got legitimately, a legitimate group of championship contenders still alive. So Thursday and Friday will be nice. And, as much Kipp as I would have enjoyed Georgia making a run, this means we get to just lay back, maybe have a beer or two, just, lay low and watch a lot of basketball. It's not the worst thing in the world for it to have played out the way it did.
Yeah, that's definitely not a media thing. I think the Georgia fans being able to sit back and relax and watch other teams play is definitely the preferred sporting experience for everyone. But you still should. These matchups are outstanding. I don't know. I still feel like these number 1 seeds are going to be really tough to beat, but I mean that's what makes it so much fun. I just think there's so many storylines left, and as a Hawks fan, I am still watching to see which one of these young stars kind of takes over a game and probably plays himself out of our pick.
That is the Hawks tradition for most years. Was not last year, but for most years. All right, we'll wrap up the episode right there. I appreciate Kipp for not only being on here, but being the MVP. Very early on in this episode, I lost Wi-Fi, and my guy didn't miss a beat. I really appreciate him holding down the fort. Again, I want to plug 50% off over at Dogs 24/7. Got some really good spring football intel. Georgia basketball, a hot board with Eric Pastrana moving on. We'll have some good content Tuesday night from Kirby Smart and the players we get to talk to. And we'll continue writing about the spring and continuing the countdown to G-Day. So go subscribe at Dogs 24/7. Go to our YouTube. Go to our TikTok. lots of good content, and it is not letting up anytime soon, especially with the transfer portal open for basketball and basketball working on making a hire, Georgia baseball, and of course, a lot more spring football ahead. So we'll wrap up the episode right there. For Kipp Adams, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.